Hey, what's up, guys? So I made a video on depression, and now I want to talk about the opposite end of that spectrum. In depression, all the energy, meaning, purpose, connection, and imagination is drained from our life. What happens when there's an abundance of it? What about psychosis? So yeah, just so that you're aware, many of the topics discussed are not part of the conventional mental health system, and nothing on this channel is professional mental health advice. If you need mental health support, please connect with your local network. All right, let's explore this in three sections. Let's talk about what it feels like, about what it is, and about what helps. So first, what it feels like. All right, I've been psychiatrically hospitalized 6 times against my will, and every single time was because I was in this state of consciousness known as psychosis. Even if you've never experienced it yourself, it's absolutely fascinating because the fish only knows it's in water after it leaves the water. This mutual consensus reality that we all swim in, it just seems like this is what is, until you leave it and then you can see it from a different angle. I think psychosis is kind of unique in one of those human experiences that can provide this perspective. It's amongst, near-death experiences, psychedelic experiences, mystical experiences, add in psychosis. And so I've been thinking about it for a long time. I've also felt it. And so this is just to, let you guys know who have felt it that I've seen that dimension as well. And to kind of give you guys a subjective sense, if you haven't experienced it, what it could be like. I mean, one of the times that I was 5150'd or taken to a psychiatric hospital against my will, it was because I believed the spirit of my dead grandfather was guiding me through the streets of Pasadena and telling me to go touch that car, go into that store, and then he told me to steal a plate. So I grabbed a plate of all things and I ran out the store, oh, straight into a cop. Cha, arrested, boy. And then that led to a 5150. Another time I believed that I was Jesus, which is pretty common in these experiences of bipolar. And yet law enforcement didn't appreciate me being Jesus. Apparently, I took some lady's cookie at Subway. I don't remember doing that part, but who knows? I don't remember what my intention was. Maybe I was trying to feed the 5,000 with the cookie. Either way, I misnavigated it a bunch of times. And so now I haven't experienced it to a point where it overwhelms me for years and years and years. And so I do believe that, as Dr. Joseph Campbell says, the person in psychosis is drowning in the same water in which the mystic swims with delight, and that we can learn to swim in this water. So, what is psychosis? What does it feel like? It's like the line between the inner world and the outer world dissolves until I believed everything was happening in my mind. I thought everything was a lucid dream. And at the same time, I'm the whole external world. I was every one of you. We were all one consciousness experiencing itself from different angles. And so whenever I'd encounter someone, it was my own subconscious mind talking to me as if a dream character would. It was almost like an enlightenment kind of experience, but a messy one. And my character obviously couldn't handle it. I wasn't ready for these things. For me, it was triggered by just a couple of hits of weed. And I know it doesn't do that for many people, but psychedelics were originally called psychotomimetics because they mimic psychosis so closely. Those of us who are neurodiverse, who are wired in these different ways, we just need a little push into that dimension and then we've cascaded into it. But as we're going to see, I believe it's a real dimension. And so you don't want to just be rocking up there unannounced. Hey, I'm here for a good time, not a long time. And so there was an enlightenment sort of feel to it. Everything made sense. The Greeks have a word for the opposite of amnesia, anamnesis. It's like a remembering on an existential scale. It's like, oh, yeah, that's what's going on. And it sort of felt like Shakespeare's All the World's a Stage. It was all this arena of consciousness that was for us. So, although that sounds amazing, and it was probably the second most profound experience of my life, seconded only by a lucid dream that I had, I also recognize it can be dangerous. Like I was putting myself in physical danger by doing things like jumping from a white line to white line in the middle of moving traffic. And I was on the top of these cliffs and believed I could fly. And many people don't experience euphoria at all. Many people, it's messy and it's scary and it's intense. So this is certainly not to glorify psychosis. It's to say that it is actually more than just an imaginative, your brain's malfunctioning. It's, I believe, a portal to a different, very real dimension. When you believe that the whole world is watching you and all the world's a stage, there's two different approaches you can take. There's paranoia, where everything's watching you and it's out to get you, Or there's pronoia, where everything's watching you and it's on your side, or you're the star of the show, kind of like the Truman Show. And so I took the latter approach, but I know a lot of the people that I work with, they experience psychosis as paranoia, and the world is not a safe place. But in my experience, everything was meaningful. Every word that people said, every song that came on, every marking on the pavement, I would follow little signs or synchronicities, as Carl Jung coined it, these divine coincidences, birds that would move from branch to branch, little markings on the pavement, different colors, the way that that particular white car drove past and honked at that particular time was a message. It was like I was experiencing this other frequency of communication. I really thought I was downloading these higher dimensional consciousnesses. And there was a dark side in my experience as well. I felt like I was taken over by something. I don't know, we're going to explore in the next model, whether it's myself, my repressed subconscious desires, my shadow self, or whether it externally, some other kind of ontologically independent being came over and took over my body, like in a possession model. It felt like the possession model. I changed my name. I started walking and talking differently. I set up a different Facebook profile. My wife said that my eyes changed. I was like ripping down the curtains. I started swearing, smoking cigarettes. I don't smoke cigarettes. I got asthma. And so something else completely took over me. But it was familiar too. It felt like it had my back, even though it turned out maybe not so much. And so I do think it would be good to revisit these ancient archetypes and these models of things like demon possession and nuance it with fresh psychology and unpack an increased understanding of that for our day. So in my experiences, everything was moving so fast. I was in this kind of like flow state. And as I would walk down the street, I would do like little hand gestures, and that person would do another hand gesture back. And I was exchanging this like subconscious flow between people. When I was in the psychiatric hospital, there was an unseen level of communication that everyone seemed to get, or most people did. And so we had this kind of alternative society. And it was based on metaphor, and it was based on speaking between the lines and not saying exactly what it is that you mean, but we all knew what we meant. In two of the psychiatric hospitals, the people believed that I was Jesus. I mean, maybe that's because I'd turned my robe into like a white coat and, and I was really going for it. But there was an alternative mode of communication in those experiences. So that was my experience in having worked with hundreds, probably thousands of people in San Diego County. I know that there's a lot of overlap in my experience and the things that they encounter. And why is that? If this is our brain malfunctioning, then it should be just like static, or it should be nonsensical. But these same kinds of themes come up again and again. It's because I believe we're connecting to a broader mode of perception. So let's talk about that in the next section of what it is. The whole premise is that psychosis is disoriented access to the soul and spirit dimensions. Let's explore what psychosis might be from a multidimensional perspective. I believe that we're multidimensional beings and we're living in all of those different dimensions simultaneously right now. So let me share a couple of slides with you guys, because although they're preliminary, just having something there as like something to point to can help us map this out. So in neurodiversity gifts, I map it out following the hero's journey that starts in the world that we think that we know, sends us on this quest into the world of the unknown. There's a death and a rebirth process, and then we come back transformed and bring some sort of a gift back into the world. Neurodiversity gifts mirrors that same sort of journey. It starts in the world that we think that we know, the West, and then it explores some frequencies and spectrums that go beyond the West. We could then get deep with depth psychology and Carl Jung's neurodiversity and explore different cultures, the South Africans, the Japanese, the Filipino Babaylan, the Native Americans. And we explore different times, the ancient Greeks and the spiritual masters from higher dimensional Christianity and higher dimensional Hinduism. And then we come back to the world that we left once before, that mysterious and yet treasureful terrain of dreams and your compass of metaphor, and land in the postmodern or the meta-modern world with a gift of transformation that we can give back to the collective community around us. So in each of these sections, let me draw a thread that connects them to a model of what psychosis might be. And I'd love to hear from you guys. What aspects do you think resonate? Which ones could we nuance? How could we tweak this? I think that collectively we know this stuff. And so it's just about getting different conceptual frameworks and aligning them into a language and a model that speaks to us in our time. So in neurodiversity in the West, we learn that we can appreciate being wired slightly differently. These mental health conditions are a neurodiversity, which means the intelligence that set up the whole created cosmos made us differently for a reason. We're wired But neuro isn't confined to the brain. We also have gut neurons and we have heart neurons, and our wiring can transcend space and distance. Like if you pluck a guitar string, it'll cause the equivalent string on a neighboring guitar to vibrate too. And many neurodiverse geniuses and game changers throughout time were able to access these new creative modes and these different ways of seeing the world, like the fish out of water, and then come back and express these profound truths. And the list of neurodiverse geniuses and game changers is long, and it encompasses all of Dr. Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence types. So that's what we learned in the first module. And the second one, as we start to join this thread together, we learn in frequencies and the science of mind that there's an unseen dimension that this wiring allows us to access. Similar to the electromagnetic spectrum, our visible world is only a tiny little sliver of the full spectrum that exists. And invisibly, on the one side is X-rays with their healing potential, and on the other side is radio waves with their potential for technological advancement. Frequencies of consciousness work in spectrums as well. There's all the various brainwave states that we can learn to consciously control. I was a neurofeedback therapist and we'd hook people up to these electrodes. And with practice, you can learn to sync your brainwaves into what you desire. There's frequencies of consciousness that go beyond the visible spectrum. And although everyone's neurodiverse, some of us are just a little more neurodiverse. It's like everyone has height, but some of our heights are further on the bell-shaped curve away from the statistical mean. Those of us who are wired in these ways that can perceive these different modes of consciousness, these different dimensions, have access to the deeper ocean that we're all swimming in, but society typically just wades in the shallow end. And then in section number 3, from depth psychology and Carl Jung's neurodiversity, we learn how Carl Jung discovered access to this dimension through his subconscious mind. While being, quote, menaced by a psychosis, he discovered a treasure, a reservoir that transcends his individuality and connects us all as humans, called the collective unconscious, sort of like a storehouse for all of our species' collective insight and memory. And he learned things from those imaginative experiences that were later verified and that he couldn't have known otherwise. In Module 4, we learn beyond culturocentrism, meaning learning from different cultures, that many different cultures refer to this dimension as the spiritual world. The South African Sangomas, for example, will have dreams of their ancestors who come and call them to become a healer. In the West, we would consider the things they go through psychosis. But there they see it's a call towards integrating the unseen dimension with the seen dimension. And it can involve hearing voices and seeing visions and accessing things through the subconscious mind and through dreams that are not available to the conscious mind, that the prefrontal cortex is filtering out. Then in Beyond Chronocentrism, turning back the clock and learning from the ancients, we learn that since ancient times, it's been known that this world is as real or more real than our societal one. And the spiritual masters can teach us how to navigate this. Plato's cave allegory says that most of society is just paying attention to these lower dimensional reflections, these 2D shadows on the wall of a cave, with our backs turned to the entrance. The shadows are actually being caused by 3D objects outside the cave, but most people don't even know they're in a cave or turn around to look. And when someone does and breaks the chains that they're in and goes out into the cave, it's hard for their eyes to adjust to this light and they can trip. But when they do, they're able to see higher dimensional reality for the first time, look into a pool of water and see their own reflection for the first time. When they run back into the cave to try and tell everyone, the people in the cave are like, quiet, we're busy watching the shadows do their thing. Plus, you can't even walk. Look at you, all battered and bruised. You don't know what you're talking about. Take a seat. Plato said the realm of ideal forms is more real than this space-time dimension that we find ourselves in. But society's probably not going to get it. Even Jesus was thought to be mad by his family and by society. This is the same Mary who had angels visit her and the wise men bring gold and stuff. And when he started doing some countercultural things, she thought that he had lost his mind. In Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, they've long recognized the non-duality between the inner and the outer world, and how everything is a reflection of the Brahman, of the divine spark that's within us. As we start to come back to that world that we left once before through dreams and your compass of metaphor, we learn that through the imagination and dreams, we can learn the forgotten dynamics of the mind and the soul. And metaphor is one avenue that can teach us to navigate our multidimensionality. The language of dreams is metaphor, and the same intelligence that constructed the dream dimension constructed this one too. And so metaphor can be a language when we start to straddle the dream world and this one. Both Jung and Freud said that psychosis is like dreaming while we're awake. And then finally, as we come back to the postmodern or the metamodern world, by navigating these dimensions, we can bring fresh insight and collective transformation into our metamodern world. The Institute of Noetic Sciences says that one little noetic experience, this experience of larger than life reality experienced within everyday ordinary life, could be the catalyst that initiates an individual transformation, which leads to a collective transformation. And this could start with just a deja vu moment or one of those aha epiphanies. And if you start exploring that, this road tends to unfold in front of you. And like Joseph Campbell says, when you're on the right path, you'll find that invisible hands are guiding you. So that is the thread that weaves together through neurodiversity gifts to start to map out what these multiple dimensions might be and what psychosis is. Now, maybe this model is a little overwhelming, and don't worry about it. I'm just trying to create something that can help us as a heuristic device, just a little shortcut that we can start to point on and we can build to it. But this describes our human multidimensionality. It's called the nested dimension or the polyolam model, which poly is Greek for many and olam is Hebrew for world, so many worlds. So you can see that we're actually in all three of these dimensions of body, soul, and spirit simultaneously right now. You can experience this, like you can experience yourself in your body right now. You know that you're sitting in a chair or wherever you are, you can feel your body. And at the same time, you're having thoughts. It's not that you've left the bodily dimension and you're having these thoughts in your soul, because the soul is the interweaving of the mind, the will, and the emotions. They're happening at the same time. And if you perceive the subtle, in the dimension of the spirit, the eternal dimension, you're sensing this kind of inner compass, this guidance, this meaning, and this purpose. Eternity is not just more time. Eternity is the dimension of here and now that thinking in linear time cuts out. If we're going to have eternal life, it's happening right now. And so all of these three dimensions are happening simultaneously. And you can see that the imagination is a perforated barrier between the world of the soul and the mind and the spiritual dimension. And different to the way that I was taught these things work, it's not that our body encompasses the soul and the soul encompasses the spirit, like somewhere in me is the spirit. It's actually the other way around. The soul, or the mind, will, and emotions create the body. It's like a form of idealism. And the spiritual world creates the soul. What is the soul? Well, let's build on Aristotle's notion of the entelechy, or this pattern. So the soul is a persistent pattern in a similar kind of way. You know, if you have a magnet and there's iron filings, all the iron filings will line up along the magnetic bands. The soul is a pattern that allows matter to constellate around these formations, which is why our cells are always changing, and like almost every cell has been replaced in 7 years, but we're still recognizable 7 years later. It's because the body is formed by the entelechy, by the soul, and the soul is formed by the spirit world. And what these worlds are constructed of is meaning and purpose, logos, intelligence. And you can see that it's highly saturated in the spiritual dimension. That's what it's made up with. And then there become gaps in the saturation in the soul dimension. You can still find it in the world of the mind. It's just a little further apart. And then in the bodily dimension, those same seeds, those same memes, if you will, of meaning and purpose are everywhere. This is what the reality is constructed with. But there's these gaps in our understanding, almost like in our heartbeat, boom, 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 boom. And often we miss it. Psychosis is an experience of going into the soul dimension and riding the world of imagination into the spirit world. That's why it's so much like a dream, and that's why so many people experience it as a spiritual reality. But these worlds are inhabited. We could visualize it like a Russian doll with a little doll inside of a bigger doll inside of a little doll. And each of those dolls is surrounded by people and entities and timelines and causality and dynamics. And so right now in the physical world, we have physical surroundings and surroundings of physical people. But in the soul world, we have other entelechies, parts of ourself, parts of the collective unconscious, parts of the spiritual world, which are also around us. And we're having these kind of conversations. The same thing is true in the spirit world. Right now, we're in a community of spiritual insight and are being influenced by these subtle forces that our body can't quite articulate. These higher dimensions energize the lower dimension. So the spirit world energizes the soul, and the soul energizes the body. That's why even if you're in pain and you're having a great time, that pain can diminish. And when the body dies, it's the spiritual dimension drawing the energy of the soul back into it and distancing itself from the body. And these dimensions are all interwoven. So different from a Russian doll where they're all separate, there's these threads of metaphor and meaning and purpose that connect them all. So because these aren't physical dimensions, you could see the spirit world as being higher than the bodily world, but you could also see it as being lower than the bodily world because it's not in physical space. We could also see it as the foundation of bodily reality. Kind of like this. The spirit world is the base level. If we take a computer or an IT metaphor, then the spiritual world is the programming language itself, which then generates and is built upon by the operating system, the soul. And there's different types. There's Mac operating system and there's Windows operating system. And then once each level has become sophisticated enough, it can build on the next level. And then the bodily dimension is built on top of the soul as the computer program or the app that you use. So these dimensions are constructed from each other. And when you have an experience of waking up to the higher dimension, which psychosis can be, it puts all the other dimensions into perspective. It's like if we moved from 2D, like Plato's shadows were on the wall of a cave, to 3D, just adding one more dimension. Say it was a shadow of a bird, it looked like a bird, but it was actually being caused by 3D hands. Then you understand reality in a whole different way. Or let's take the flatland metaphor. What if we had a flat 2D circle on a 2D piece of paper, and then we added one more dimension, height, and we saw that that 2D circle is actually the head of a queen in a game of chess, and the board had previously been cut out. It puts the movement of that circle into a whole different meaning and perspective and context. And so an experience of these larger dimensions can really change the way that we live, change the way that we are in the world. And that's why so many people are different after having near-death experiences. They come back different with different perspective. And since these worlds are constructed by meaning and we are story-making beings as humans, metaphor is the thread that people can climb up to get to these other dimensions, which is why metaphor is so prevalent within psychosis. Everything can be metaphorical. The song that's come on is a metaphor communicating some sort of a memory or an intuition from the universe to you. Road signs and license plates can be metaphorical messages to you. And nature's always speaking of the same intelligence that built us. And that's why Jesus and Buddha both use nature metaphors to describe spiritual reality. And this is what the genius neurodiverse inventor Emanuel Swedenborg discovered in the 1800s. He was far ahead of his time with inventions in all these different disciplines. And then around mid-age, he had an experience of what could be seen as bipolar. We started to hear from these angels, and he discovered that he was living in these simultaneous dimensions. And through his theory of correspondences, or very similar to the metaphor here, every physical thing represents something in the soul world and represents something in the spirit world. He actually called it the physical dimension, the spiritual dimension, and the heavenly dimension. But his encounters of these other dimensions allowed him to see beyond the usual confines of space and time, similar to South African sangomas, the shaman ability to see beyond space and time. Swedenborg was able to predict the day of his death to the day, and then it happened, months in advance. And one time he was 400 miles away from his home, and he suddenly started like freaking out and stressing in a dinner party, saying, "My house is going to be burnt down, my house is going to be burnt down." And then a few minutes later, he's like, "Okay, phew, the fire diverted." It turns out that even the mayor verified that at that exact time, a fire was approaching Swedenborg's house. And when he said it diverted, that's when it diverted. So these dimensions can really provide us some real insight into the bodily dimension too. Swedenborg believed that the sun was a metaphor for God's light and his love shining down on us. And in this reality, in this dimension, the sun was literally God. And that aligns with the modern thinker Rupert Sheldrake as well, who believes that the sun is conscious. And through a version of panpsychism, everything is conscious. This whole nature is alive. The earth is alive. And through Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance, we're connected in these ways that our current understandings just can't capture. So that's just a visual depiction of how I believe that psychosis is access to a very real dimension of reality. But if we don't know how to navigate that dimension, it can be dangerous. The whole premise is that psychosis is disoriented access to the soul and spirit dimensions. And so we need to learn how to swim. And so in this final section, let's explore some things that can help us to learn to swim in these terrains. So what helps? Well, metaphor. Learning to distinguish the metaphorical from the literal, and learning to rely on the ancients and turn to mystical literature and wise teachers in the spiritual tradition to teach us how to navigate these various planes. What also helps is playing the tortoise and not the hare game. When I was in my psychosis, I had all of these brilliant ideas and I wanted to do all of them right now. But I learned that when you try to force reality to happen, you burn yourself out and it can go a different kind of way. And so it was the tortoise who ended up winning the race through that consistency. So it's worth capturing these ideas and writing them down and collaborating and that kind of a thing. But it's also worth bearing in mind that it could be a marathon. We've got to pace ourselves. Icarus got a little excited and flew too high towards the sun. The sun melted the wax on his wings and he came plummeting down. If Icarus had have just paced himself, his flight would have been able to take him somewhere. Another thing that helps is antipsychotic medication. And whether you're pro meds or against meds, meds can help some people. And in the midst of my psychosis, they helped to ground me so that I didn't jump in front of a car or believe that I could fly. And then as I learned to swim in this terrain, I was able to gradually taper the dosage of my medication with my psychiatrist's support and then come off completely. But it is pretty amazing how a particular type of chemical could be a cutting-edge neurotechnological tool that allows you to reorient yourself in the bodily dimension. So along with the bodily dimension, some of the things that help are heavy foods, eating like starches and stuff that help you to just sink into your body. Staying embodied with things like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding exercise, counting off 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. Helps to integrate you with the tangible moment and the eternity that's here in this moment. Reducing caffeine, not taking any drugs, cutting out the alcohol, all those kinds of things can help to ground us. Ensuring solid sleep. See, psychosis and sleep could be linked because the dream dimension, the spiritual world, the imagination dimension breaks into our physical dimension if we haven't been having our regular nightly excursions. That's why, like on long cycling races and stuff, towards the end, people start to like see gnomes run in front of them and all sorts of things because that imaginative dimension starts to break in here. If we're having our regular excursions there, there's a wisdom and an intelligence that guides us and the dynamics that are happening there so that when we come back to the body, everything is ordered. What helps with psychosis is being in nature, the peace and the serenity and the inspiration of nature. Journaling, writing these things down, like capture it all, capture it in voice memos or write it all down because you might see later on when you look back, oh, there's these threads that I didn't notice at the time. Pausing, we don't have to make any big decisions right then. You can let it digest, you can kind of incubate those decisions. Exercise, dissipating some of that biopsychosocial spiritual energy that's inside us, and self-expression of all kinds, music and art and creativity. These can become these cathartic ways of transmuting within the higher dimensions into an embodied form that we can share as a gift with our society. So those are some things that have helped me. What helps you? Put your comments in the chat so that you can help others. And if you want to take the self-paced digital course of neurodiversity gifts, check out the links in the descriptions below. And if you want to learn more about this stuff and see some of the evidence and how these models are fleshed out, feel free to download the paper at the link in the description below. It's completely free. So what is psychosis? It comes down to who we are. Who are we? Maybe the problem isn't anosognosia, a lack of insight, but it's anosognosis, a lack of insight into who we are. Who are we as humans? Are we just these random particles bumping up against each other with no meaning or purpose, like reductive materialism would tell us? Or are we these multidimensional beings saturated with meaning and purpose? And can we gain this higher perspective if we learn to climb that thread of metaphor with wisdom? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's share them because we can learn to sync up our embodied dance with the multidimensional music of the sphere.